Hello there, this is James S. 1978, and a couple of days ago now, while I was editing my 30-minute video discussing the representation of female East Asian characters in media, fiction, and what have you, as well as the stereotypes which persist against women of East Asian descent in real life, links down in the underbar, this photo instigated a brief discussion between myself and my girlfriend Teresa over the strong female character trope, a conversation that was incredibly short precisely because there is so little to be said. After all, while it's an undeniable reality that all media and fiction have made significant strides in their representation of female characters during my lifetime, the sad truth remains that the entire scope of most writers and other creators' vision and efforts when devising a quote-unquote strong female character is still, she's a woman, but she can fight like a man, or is perhaps even better at fighting than the men. From the princess in the animated movie Brave to Mulan, from Samus Aran to Lara Croft, from every female character in Kill Bill to Black Widow in the Avengers movies and Mako Mori in Pacific Rim, and most of all, the fact that Buffy the Vampire Slayer was based entirely upon the joke of what if a cheerleader named Buffy, of all things, went out at night hunting vampires. As a society, and as straight cisgendered men in particular, since on a fundamental, collectively unconscious level, we still perceive the defining distinction between male and female as being that men are strong and women are weak, even after more than 30 years of seeing this trope in everything from children's cartoons to action movies, the be-all and end-all of most efforts to create female characters who are not wives, daughters, mothers, Madonnas, whores, manic pixies, or who otherwise revolve around and exist solely for the benefit of the male characters or male members of the audience, is still, she's a woman, but she can fight even better than the men, and the genuinely terrifying and depressing aspect of that reality is that as a society, and as straight cisgendered men in particular, we are still buying that trope in spades, because going back to Kill Bill as the ultimate example of this strong female character trope, oh my god, she's a Japanese schoolgirl, which in my mind, and in the minds of humanity in general, immediately equates with submissiveness and weakness, but she's also a brutal killer who wields a solid steel ball on a metal chain. My mind is blown by the juxtaposition of masculine and feminine stereotypes, even though we've been seeing it for decades and should be completely over it and able to move on by now. So blown, in fact, that many people are even turned on by it, just as they are by the sexual fantasy of the warrior Amazon, because a strong, independent woman, in the most absurdly literal sense of that term, that's an exotic rarity to be fetishized by men. Even worse than this, though, is the fact that when writers and other creators seek to humanize their quote-unquote strong female characters, they still often do so simply by showing that underneath all of their toughness and physical strength, they are still defenseless little girls who need daddy to protect and take care of them. And while the reality, which I am compelled to state, even though too many people believe it to be some kind of defense against accusations of misogyny or what have you, is that neither this nor the strong female character trope itself are ever really intentional, the very fact that they are almost entirely the result of lazy hack writing and or design created because this is what most people automatically assume without the writers and or designers ever having to do any actual work, demonstrates that the problem is so much worse that, as I said before, as a society and as straight cisgendered men in particular, we are still so invested in the social norm and absolute that femininity is weakness, never even noticing how misogynistic that is, let alone questioning it, that seeing a quote-unquote strong woman, that is to say, a woman who can fight like a man even though only men are ever supposed to be able to fight, blows our minds, causing us to feel confusion, uncertainty, disbelief, insecurity, and even fear, leading much of the audience to leap to the conclusion, whether the character ever goes there herself or not, that her apparent strength is merely a facade and she's still just a little girl at heart, because having the social norm by which we judge ourselves and everyone else violated makes us feel confused, angry, and scared. And from telling feminists that they simply need to get laid, to telling bisexual individuals that it's only a phase, and transgender individuals that they're mentally ill, too many of us will believe, cling to, and viciously defend any simple because statement that maintains the social norm, no matter how entirely false or ridiculous it may be. Since this is the internet, of course, the place where some things are so blindingly obvious that we do indeed have to state them explicitly, just as there are when pointing out any other issues of representation, there are always exceptions, with Scully from The X-Files immediately springing to mind. Cough. Gillian Anderson being paid half as much as David Duchovny, cough cough. However, as I indicated repeatedly in the video links down as the underbar, the fact that there are exceptions doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist, any more than we didn't intend to be racist makes casting white actors in non-white roles okay. And as always, rather than calling for Quentin Tarantino to be burned on top of a pile of his own juvenile revenge porn, which is nowhere near as clever as he believes it to be, although that would be nice if anyone has a can of petrol and the keys to his mansion. Anyone? No different from pointing out microaggressions or anything else, the goal is not simply to make you feel bad, but rather to make you stop and think that, hang on a moment, simply showing women being physically strong in fiction and media doesn't actually change anything at all, and only when all female characters are depicted as being just as strong and as weak, as capable and as flawed, and more importantly, just as important to the story as their male counterparts, will they actually be female characters, instead of tokens that we place on pedestals as evidence that we can't possibly be misogynistic anymore, or drop into otherwise entirely male movies in the pathetic and transparent attempt to merely look progressive by declaring that, see, this female character who could just as easily have been male or cut from the movie altogether is as good at fighting as the men, as if that somehow deserves a cookie and a pat on the head. And how precisely are we supposed to go about achieving this impossible dream, creating the nightmare feminazi dystopia in which female characters in fiction and media actually represent women, instead of merely being reflections of what male writers and designers imagine women or want women to be? By accepting and embracing the work of the countless female writers, designers, and other creators who are out there producing content by the ton as being just as worthy, just as valid, and just as potentially profitable as that of their male counterparts, instead of constantly demanding of them, either explicitly or implicitly, that, okay, I suppose that what you're doing is suitable for the tiny token niche female audience. I wouldn't know because I'm too busy watching real movies and playing real video games, but if you want to break through into the big time, sweetheart, then you have to tell me, how do we make this more relatable and acceptable to men?